What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Newt News Podcast. We're super excited to be joined today by Josh Jacobs. He writes over at Redbird Rants. We really appreciate his work. He puts forth a lot of great stuff. So go give him a read whenever you've got some free time. He's always producing some great content, and we're super excited to have him on today. So I guess the first thing we want to start with is we want to sort of note that the Cardinals have been playing some really good baseball lately. I believe they've won 6 of their last 8, which is really nice to see. This is exactly the type of thing a lot of us wanted to see from the team. The offense looks a little bit more consistent. The pitching has been better. But I guess I just wanted to ask you guys right away, is there anything you see that looks different? And should this be some source of hope moving forward?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of, from an outside looking in perspective, it feels kind of just this team has encouraging signs in the offense, and it actually hasn't been performing this much this month as much as you would want it to. The pitching has kind of come on recently. You've gotten some good outings from Jordan Montgomery. The bullpen's kind of held itself down. So in my opinion, the team just kind of looks like it's how it's supposed to look. It's what my expectations were coming into the season as a runaway favorite of the National League Central. I don't think they've really made any extreme changes. I mean, obviously, you look at the lineup each day. The only real change is Jordan Walker is getting more opportunities toward the top. You've got the re-addition of Lars Nootbaar, which has been huge for them. But overall, it just kind of seems like guys are finally their groove a little bit. You can kind of tell they are a little bit looser. If you look at Ollie Marmol in the dugout, even post-game, you look at the players, they seem to be having a little bit more fun. They seem to be not as nervous in the field. I would say the last few games they've made some really dumb errors, so I can't necessarily say that. But for the most part, they've been playing clean baseball. So I think it's just they're playing to their talent level now. They've been playing so below it all season. It hasn't made sense. But it seems like something's clicked, and it's probably something internal. And I don't know if there's if on the outside looking in, we can actually point to what that is, but it just seems like they're a lot looser right now. Xavier, I don't know what you would say about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if the Cardinals season started, 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, this would not be surprising at all to me in terms of how they're playing right now. I think this is how a lot of us expected them to start the season off. Like you mentioned, Sandy, they've won 6 of 8. That's a very good stretch of, week and a half or so. And I think one thing that may have brought this is kind of the London series. I know they were playing all right baseball going into it. And then they did only split that series, of course, after pretty poor performance by Wainwright. But I think that was just a lot of fun. It got the guys sort of on national TV. It gave them a lot of confidence playing out in England. And I think that might have kind of been a catalyst for some better baseball recently.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we should be thinking about. And yeah, I mean, the sightseeing days seemed really fun beforehand. So you're right. It probably did put the team with a better mindset, which is just nice to see because this team just felt so down on itself. It was kind of this thing where, when it rains, it pours with the 2023 Cardinals. It felt like one error in the first inning could start a landslide that will result in yet another close loss. And it's been nice to see the team break through and win some close games. Specifically yesterday's game, I thought that was one of the most complete wins I've seen from them all year. And the offense didn't even really perform that well. We saw the team have a number of chances to break through. They hit Framber really hard. I was surprised he only gave up the 4 runs. Some of the exit velocities and some of those hard hit balls that turned into outs. But yeah, I mean, everything looked really great yesterday. I'm hopeful, at least moving forward, that this can be a really strong stretch of baseball. And I guess what I also want to ask is, with everything, starting to click, do you think the Cardinals could contend? Do you think they have a chance to get back into any of the races, specifically the divisional race?
It's so hard to say because I think no matter what, they have to go on they can't just be playing slightly above 500. They got to be winning 65% of their games probably all the way through to have a really good shot at it. So is it possible? Yes. But I also think it depends on how did the Cincinnati Reds play? How did the Milwaukee Brewers play? Brewers haven't been as good as of late. The Reds have obviously been red hot. The Cubs have even been pretty good recently. So they were in this spot for a long time, like back in May and June or early June, where the division was just continuously giving them opportunities to get back in it. It's not happening anymore. And so I think a lot of it's dependent on if they can keep up a really high win pace. They'll have to win some of the most games out of all the rest of the teams in baseball, the rest of the way to do it. And again, I think they have the talent to do it. It's just, will they? And then they also need some help at the top of the division. So I wouldn't bank on it, but I think it's still too early to count them out because, like, if you look over at the National League East, The Mets are 16 games out right now. Like they're out of it, and they're 8.5 out of the wild card behind like 5 or 6 teams that I would say are better than them. You look at this division, I think the Cardinals are still the most talented team. It's just again, they've dug so deep of a hole, and you have teams kind of coming along now. Can they actually do it? So can they? Yes. Will they? We'll see.
Right. And one thing I'll say, I mean, this team won 17 straight games with a roster that is worse than the roster that they have right now.
Yeah.
And so with this Cardinals team, really anything can happen. One thing though, even if the Cardinals starting today won 17 games in a row, they would only be 5 games above 500 and not at all comfortable in this division still with teams like the Reds going on crazy runs like that. The Pirates are still young and have a shot at, getting back up in the standings. And even if the Cardinals do, miraculously make the playoffs, go on some crazy 2021-esque run, I don't see them as World Series contenders at all unless they make just some massive moves this trade deadline. Yeah. And so I feel like that's the cycle that the Cardinals keep falling back into. Barely squeak into the playoffs and then get crushed by a team like the Braves or the Dodgers or some of those NL elites.
Yeah, that is so true. I love what both you said there. And I do think when I just look at the division really quickly again, I think the Cardinals are definitely the most talented team. I love what you said there, Josh, because I think the Reds have pitching problems. I'm not sure they're going to have the depth. Some of their young pitchers like Abbott have really overperformed thus far. And I mean, he's not going to have a 1.2 ERA the rest of the way. That's just not going to happen. And the Brewers, they don't look like they're going to hit enough to me. I think the Cubs might be both the most complete of those 3 teams, but also the least interesting of those 3 teams, definitely the least dynamic. And the Pirates seem to be falling out of contention rapidly. So yeah, the Cardinals might be the most talented team, but you guys are so right. The hole they've dug is really deep because it's June. I wish we were having this conversation in May, and it felt like we were for a second before a second skid. But Xavier, you also brought up a really interesting point about the Cardinals, sort of yearly cycle of barely get into the playoffs and then get crushed by a super team. Do you think that could come from the 2 magical runs that they had in 06 and 11, where it seemed like, oh, let's make the playoffs. It's a lottery ticket type thing, where now team construction feels so different with these, super teams appearing that didn't really seem to be as much of a thing back then.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think that the Cardinals' identity as a team has just changed so much since then. You don't have those veteran guys. You don't have that leadership that I was talking about last time I was on. And I think that is such a big factor of going on one of those 2011 type runs. Yeah. And, like you said, obviously the great teams are so much better now. So I think both of those just make that a lot less possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you'd add in a little bit too, and I think this has been started to be noted, like they just haven't had a season this bad. Since the DeWitts owned the team and since like Mozeliak has been alive, like not been in charge of the Cardinals, like they haven't had a season this bad in 100 years. And so when you're constantly in contention and you're constantly sneaking in, they made the NLCS 4 times, I think, in the 2010s, which is if it's probably top 3 with the Dodgers and Braves. They have reasons to say, hey, we've come very close and we've achieved the goal within the last 12 years now. So, but they haven't had a season where they bottom out like this. So I think, and in all honesty, a season like this might have been one of the best things to happen to the future of this organization, because it makes them actually have to reassess for once, instead of, oh, we can make a few tweaks here and there, hope for a run. Like, even a miracle run, like you said, Xavier, puts you 5 games above 500 right now. Like that's not good enough anymore. And so I think it's a mixture of, yes, they've had these magical runs before, but they've also never really bottomed out like this, especially with a team with expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it just speaks to the sheer level of disappointment in this season. The Cardinals haven't finished last in a division in I think like 120 some years is what I read. And like, it's a real possibility right now. I don't think it'll happen. I think we're more talented than the teams at the bottom of this division, enough that the 3 games between the Cardinals and the Pirates shouldn't matter that much. I think there's probably a 100-game loser in the Central, and I don't think it's the Cardinals. But at the same time, it's very shocking to see them just this bad. You're absolutely right. But as we said, the last stretch has been a little bit encouraging. And I think a huge part of that, just to shift gears a little bit, has been Jordan Hicks. What does he mean to this team? I would love both you to chime in here.
Yeah, Xavier, go ahead and hop in, man.
Okay. I mean, he's been great. That 3-game win streak that they went on where Hicks closed out the ninth in each of those games, that was awesome. And I feel like the Cardinals, their lineup was obviously their strong suit, we thought, heading into this season. And that's kind of lived up to the expectations. But the bullpen, I think, has been one of the most disappointing parts of this team. The lineup you knew was going to be good, and it's been good enough. The starting pitching you knew was going to be pretty bad, and it has been. And the bullpen is one thing that you expected to be good. And it seems like I couldn't even remember before that run by Hicks the last time that the Cardinals bullpen pitched a 7th, 8th, and 9th scoreless. And so I'm sure, there were a few of those instances that I just missed, but I think that Hicks has provided a lot of great stability, gave the Cardinals that confidence that if you're leading by maybe 1 or 2 runs going into the later portions of the game, that you're going to win that game and you're not going to have to worry about some crazy Giants-esque comeback.
Yeah.
That was the worst. I just could not believe my eyes.
That was awful.
There's been too many of those games this year where it's like, can it get worse than this? Oh yeah,
Yes.
They found a way. I mean, I was someone who I started to buy into the DFA Jordan Hicks bandwagon for a hot minute there. And the fact that he turned it around the way he does or has is a miracle. It's been awesome. And it's like the dude with the stuff he has, you would think he would be this good, but he had never really been able to figure it out. He's, I think for his career, averaged just above 8 strikeouts an inning or per 9 innings. And he's up to 13.5 over his last 14 games, over 14 over his last 11 games. And so he's just found the strikeout stuff now too, which has been great. I think his role it's the closer now. Like, I don't think you can take him away from that. I do think the Cardinals are pretty nuanced in how they use their bullpen pieces, where I could see them pulling him out in the bottom of the 7th because there's a bases loaded situation. They want to get out of it. But I think for the most part, they're going to let him lock down the end of the games unless something happens and he falls off a little bit. And Helsley, I saw he started throwing again today, and they're projecting about 3 weeks out for him. So once you get him back, assuming the rehab process can remain healthy for him, like, you have a really good trio at the back of the bullpen. So if they can start to make a push here, I think honestly adding one more bullpen arm at the deadline gives you a really good bullpen for the playoffs, where you only need 4 or 5 innings from your starter and you can kind of patch together the rest of it with some elite arms. Or if they do decide they need to sell some things at the deadline, Hicks is going to be possibly the best reliever on the market. Giovanni Gallegos has one of the best reliever contracts in all of baseball, so he's going to be valuable. And obviously Ryan Helsley's coming off a dominant season. So whichever way it plays right now, whether it's they want to keep him for a run or they want to be able to capitalize on their value, the emergence of Hicks has been huge.
Yeah, I think if they keep Hicks, obviously they're going for it. If you don't want to go for it, you have to deal Hicks. I referred to Hicks, Gallegos, and Helsley as a 3-headed monster in the offseason and got a lot of hate for that early in the season. And you're right. I, like you, jumped onto the DFA Hicks bandwagon for a couple of days after the Tigers blow up. It was just brutal. I mean, how does this guy who had the ability in the past at least to throw 105 and regularly sits 103 these days, how can his fastball be so hittable was a question we were all asking. And all of a sudden now it's not, which is really nice. But the Cardinals bullpen, as much as it feels like it's been bad, when you sort of dive into some of the analytics, it's just weird. The bullpen with a 1-run lead or in a tied ball game is awful. But with a more secure lead, the Cardinals bullpen is among the best in baseball. And so I think that's what Jordan Hicks really brings to the table here. He brings someone who can perform in the big moments, which is something we just haven't done this whole year. Yeah. I usually chalk up like 5 games a season where it's one of those like, well, that was the worst thing ever, losses. I feel like you get about 5 of those per year. And the Cardinals had 5 of those within the first 50 games, which, I mean, it was like, it was Cleveland. It was San Francisco. It was the 2 Tigers games. You figure you only get a couple of those a year, and we used them all up so fast and then kept using more. So I think what Hicks really brings is someone who can actually perform in the clutch moment. And the Cardinals bullpen will finally start to do what it's supposed to. Before he took over the role, they were 15 for 30 in save opportunities.
Wow.
Which is just, and from a bullpen that is top 5 in terms of FIP and XFIP.
Yeah.
To be that awful.
Yeah. And then when you couple that with the middle of the middle inning bullpen arms, like Stratton, Verhagen, they have their stretches where they're really good and they're due for a blow up every once in a while. And then you're not getting innings from your starters either. So it's all compounding. Like if you're only getting 4 or 5 hopefully sometimes 6 innings from your rotation. That puts more pressure on the middle relievers, which puts more pressure on the back end of the bullpen. So if one of these 3 units, which the rotation and I would say the back end of the bullpen have been stabilizing, Hicks especially, been the rotation, like Montgomery has been stabilizing a lot lately. That, I mean, just has an effect on the rest of the pitching staff. And so, like you said, if Hicks can continue this for the next few weeks, it might have an adverse effect on a Stratton. It might have an adverse effect on the Gallegos, so the rotation.
Right. And I think another thing about Hicks, just psychologically for the other team, if I'm down 1 or 2 runs heading into the 9th inning, and I am a hitter, and I'm obviously no hitter, so they're much better at hitting 100 miles an hour than I will ever be. But just the idea of having to score a few runs in 1 inning, consistently going up against triple-digit fastballs, is just terrifying.
Yeah.
And especially once he adds that control, which has kind of been one of his biggest issues. So if he can keep that control there, I mean, that's got to be terrifying for other teams.
Totally agree. I think Hicks is absolutely massive to this club. And when Helsley comes back, I'll be really excited to see how Ollie sort of manages the back end of that pen. I know a lot of Cardinals fans, criticize Ollie all over the place. I think his management at the back of the pen since Hicks has emerged has been really good. I loved the decision to throw Hicks for a 3rd day in a row. I thought that was really bold. And I'm glad Jordan Hicks seems to be the type of guy that wants the ball. That's something I think the Cardinals really need. It feels like all the time the Cardinals have players who are maybe hurt but not injured and don't seem to want the big opportunity. And seeing Hicks have that bulldog mentality is fantastic.
Totally. And that's been a problem that I think people pin on Ollie a lot. And I don't know what he can do about it. Is that Helsley's kind of like, you pitch him one day and then he kind of needs a day or 2 to rest. Sometimes he can go 2 in a row and then he's out for 3 days. Gallegos is kind of like that. And what do you do when your top relievers can't go multiple days in a row? So I think you're right, Sandy. That's a very underrated part of Hicks' run here, is the fact that he can close every game of a series for you. Now he can't do it 4 or 5 days in a row, but like if you have a big series against the Mets, you can put him out there every game and expect results.
And I think that'll be especially big if the Cardinals, again, miraculously make the playoffs, because like you mentioned, he could close out every game of a series in the playoffs. And especially in, a wild card type matchup, that would just be massive.
Totally.
Oh yeah. We've seen that firsthand. Shifting gears a little bit again, I've heard some rumors that O'Neill is back to baseball activities. We're hoping to see him up with the big league club at some point before the deadline, probably after. He said he hopes to be on a rehab assignment by next week. So O'Neill's a name that I've heard floated out in a lot of trade packages, and we'll get into this a little deeper near the end of the show. But I just want to ask, does O'Neill have value right now? What's Tyler O'Neill's value?
Yeah, it's a hard one to gauge, but I do think it's higher than people would expect it to be. I know for a fact the Brewers have called in on him before, at least expressed interest. Now, I don't see an interdivision trade, but I think the fact that Milwaukee is reaching out to St. Louis about him shows there's probably some other teams around the league that have some interest too. But yeah, again, gauging what that is, if you're looking at a contender, maybe you can get a swap of major league ready talent, kind of like the Bader Montgomery situation. You're not going to get a Montgomery level pitcher, but maybe something like that. Or you look at a team, even a middling team like the Guardians that haven't really played that well this year. They could look at it as an opportunity to help their offense out for 2023, but really to have a buy low option going into 2024, hoping that in the contract year, he has another top 10 MVP type season. And even if he doesn't output that, if you get elite defense in the outfield and you get 25 to 30 home runs, like that's a valuable player.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested to see what happens with that. Especially if he can get to the field. I guess at this rate, it'd be like a week or 2 before the deadline. So it's not like he has that much time to show what he's got going on. I will be interested to see what they do, though, when he's ready, if they do bring him back, because they'll either have to option Burleson or DFA Mercado, which both of those moves would be kind of interesting, because I would probably lean toward they would option Burleson so they can keep Mercado, because they would probably be trading O'Neill within the week. But who knows, like with how much little time he has to turn around, they might not like the market, and you might see O'Neill stay for the second half, which I think I've been someone who's kind of wrote off the idea that he'll be back, but the longer this process has taken, the more it seemed like he might actually have to stick around for the longer.
Yeah, and I definitely think the Cardinals would want him to at least play a few games before they ship him off. just to prove to those other teams that he's still got it. He's still got that potential to be, a 30 home run kind of guy. And I also think it would be good to show that he isn't sort of a bad guy in the locker room. I think that his relationship with Ollie Marmol has not really fully healed since that incident towards the beginning of the season. And I honestly sometimes forget that he's really part of this team. And this isn't based on any information or anything, but he just doesn't feel like he's going to be a Cardinal for very much longer.
Yeah, that's really tough because I would say I'm an O'Neal truther. Like I've been an O'Neal fan for a long time, and it's not because I invested money in an O'Neal jersey recently. Okay, I do like Tyler O'Neill, and I want him to be a part of the future of the Cardinals. And it's really hard because he's someone I was getting more invested with the farm system when they traded for him, and I was really excited. Oh, another top 100 prospects type of thing, and it was nice to see him come up. And I love his tools. He's got this power speed combo that we look for in superstars today. It's elite. And his value just is so low compared to what it was.
Yeah.
And I hate selling low on players. And I think the Cardinals front office does too, which is why the more I look at this, I think you might be right. He might be here after the trade deadline. And if that's the case, he's probably going to play. I think O'Neal will play if he's on the active roster. So the O'Neal situation is definitely something to monitor moving forward.
I do think, especially, we'll get into I know we'll get more deadline talk as we go, but if they end up moving like a Donovan, a Gorman, a Nootbaar, like a Carlson, one of these higher valued assets for pitching, there's a role for O'Neal there.
Yes.
If Edman moves back to the infield, obviously they don't trust Jordan Walker in the outfield right now, so keeping him at DH, they'll have a third spot available. Or again, if they move one of those outfielders, there's space for him. So I could see them pull, and especially with how deep this lineup is right now, even if they don't trust him, if he's your 8th or 9th option, that's a really good lineup. So I could see them being like, hey, let's see what happens the second half. We have Burleson in our back pocket. If we need, we can move Tommy Edman around or Brendan Donovan around if he gets injured again. So I definitely think it's more possible than people would give it credit for that he stays on the roster. But if I had to bet, I think there's probably a team that comes calling that wants him enough that they're willing to move on from him. But it really does depend on what they do with these other pieces.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to move into sort of talking about the trade deadline here. So we're going to try to sort this from like very plausible to out there, right? So we'll save the Ohtani talk for the very end because I don't think there's a chance in hell that happens. But Andrew, it's the obligatory question, and Andrew told me to ask it. So I guess something we'll start with is, in your opinion, if the Cardinals decide not to full on sell, what pitching help is available that is the most likely?
Yeah, that's the tough part, is what's the most likely, because teams are all, as much as we look at the Cardinals and like we have to wait a few weeks to see what they're going to do. Yeah. That's pretty much every team in baseball right now. Is like the Mets. Steve Cohen just held a press conference today, and there's a chance Verlander and Scherzer are available. There's a chance they're buying. Like, we don't know because there's still time left. And so I think if I were to say like what are the likelier names available, I think you go to like a Lucas Giolito, a Lance Lynn type. Like those rentals seem to always be available. If I think in the controllable arm standpoint, I know John Morrissey put a link between the Mariners and the Cardinals.
Yes,
and
I did want to talk about that in a little bit.
Which I would say is not likely, but I think makes a lot of sense. So we can get into that. But again, likely arms, I would look at Cleveland and Chicago. The White Sox is probably the two teams that can match up with the Cardinals. It sounds like the Marcus Stroman situation is really fluid right now, but there's no way the Cubs and Cardinals make a trade on that. But then you look around the rest of baseball, I don't really see a team that's going to sell arms. The Marlins is another team, but I just think they're so deep into contention right now. I don't think they're going to give up arms. So I would look at Cleveland and Chicago's arms, especially the rentals, as ones. Shane Bieber could be an option, but they still haven't really seemed committal on what they're going to go with that. So Xavier, I don't know if there's any other names you would throw out there.
Yeah, I definitely think that Chicago and Seattle are the two biggest teams there. I think that Cleveland, there's been a history of Cleveland trading their pitchers, and then those pitchers just immediately are awful for whatever team they end up going to. And who's to say if that would happen with a guy like Shane Bieber? But I just overall think that it would be a mistake of the Cardinals to buy this trade deadline, especially if they're buying rentals. I think it would give the Cardinals fans a false sense of hope that they're going to somehow compete And I think it would be much smarter of them to admit, clearly this isn't our year to compete for a World Series, which is really what we're all after at the end of the day. And I think it would make a lot more sense if they sort of sell their guys who are expiring contracts and try to reset next year with a fresh sense of talent and some younger guys maybe. And I think next year is really the year that they should be going for it.
Yeah, I will counter that really quickly. I agree. If the Cardinals are more than 4 or 5 games back in the Central, absolutely sell. But at the same time, we've seen the Cardinals make these low profile moves, and 2021 always comes back to mind. And sure, we're not going to win 17 straight, but if the Cardinals are hanging around, which means probably improving on, the division gap by 3 or 4 games over the next 2 weeks or so, if they're still hanging around by the deadline, maybe like someone like Rich Hill. Because that offseason or that deadline, I believe they acquired Lester, Happ, and then they acquired LeBlanc in an earlier deal. And it was like 3 pitchers that are all 40 years old. But those acquisitions, which cost us nothing for what it's worth. People are complaining about Lane Thomas. I don't want to hear that talk. That's ridiculous. Those acquisitions actually, found lightning in a bottle. And it worked out really, really well. And so I think maybe if the Cardinals don't do much, I'm looking at some of the really old pitchers on the market like Rich Hill. And I think maybe he's a fit for the Cardinals.
No, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Even if, because I don't know how much we'll get into philosophy of the deadline.
Yeah.
I think it's the way they're leaning right now is to be kind of selling and buying.
Yes.
And with buying to be on eyes of the future, like you said, Xavier, but selling on those pieces that aren't going to help them past 2023. But the ROI they can get on Jordan Montgomery or Jordan Hicks is pretty high, but what it will take to get a Rich Hill is pretty low. So I could see them going after a controllable arm, trading away Montgomery and Flaherty, and then replacing the other arm. So they trade away 2, they bring in a guy with control beyond this year, but then they bring in a Rich Hill to replace Indians the rest of the year because it costs them a low level prospect. So they could play and be creative there. That would look kind of like an Atlanta Braves offseason or a trade deadline from with their World Series run mixed with the New York Yankees from 2016. So we just haven't seen it before, which makes me question if it will happen. But the way Mozeliak has openly talked about this, I got an opportunity to talk to him in early June, and he was already talking about this idea of if we get to the deadline, we could look to bring in guys who are going to help us beyond this year. And he mentioned the names of impending free agents, Flaherty, Montgomery, Hicks. So I think they've got Michael Gersh and the rest of the front office looking at these different scenarios of, can we, for example, trade Montgomery and Flaherty to contenders, bring in a Logan Gilbert from Seattle to replace one of them, bring in a Rich Hill, trade away a Jordan Hicks, but acquire a low-end reliever. They could make 6-7 trades where 4 of them are selling, 3 of them are buying, and then see what happens.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us like to sort of insult John Mozeliak's abilities to acquire pitching. And, obviously he doesn't like spending money in the offseason. But I think one of his best traits is those sneaky little deadline acquisitions, especially of pitchers like you guys have mentioned. Another one that I'll throw out there is Jose Quintana. Yes. He was arguably the Cardinals' best pitcher down the run in that season. And then also about Lane Thomas really quickly. We all know how crowded this Cardinals outfield is. I don't really think there's any chance Lane Thomas would have had more than, 10 games started this season for the Cardinals, barring injury, of course. And so I'm really excited to see what they do. I think you guys are both right. They have the potential to kind of do a bit of both and improve their stock in the future as well.
About the Lane Thomas stuff, I want to touch on that really quickly again. As someone who was a little bit of a Lane Thomas fan when he left, I don't know. I like Lane Thomas. I pointed out to people that the previous year he'd been very good in a small sample size, but the wrist injury, which he was dealing with at that point, knocked him out for the rest of that year. And then when he got traded, it just made a lot of sense. He didn't have a place here. And so I hate to see people just jump on Mo, because I think we've done that a lot lately. People act like they knew Zach Gallen was going to be an ace. No, you didn't. Zach Gallen wasn't even a top 10 prospect within our organization. No one knew Zach Gallen was going to be this incredible. And I'm happy for him that he is. I'm happy for the Diamondbacks that they were able to acquire him. But nobody knew that was going to happen. And I heard the same sort of stuff happening when Oviedo had a strong start to the season in Pittsburgh. It's like the Oviedo experiment was over in St. Louis. Yeah. It did not go well in the pandemic season. It was tough to watch. We all wanted Oviedo to succeed, but it was clear that as a Cardinal, that just wasn't going to happen. It was time for him to get a change of scenery. And I'm glad that his career has had a little bit of a resurgence in Pittsburgh. So I think the Lane Thomas stuff that's being talked about right now, the Adolis Garcia stuff, again, you don't know. Everyone passed on Garcia. The Texas Rangers DFA'd him after acquiring him for cash considerations the first time. We could have had him back.
Yeah.
I think, there are a lot of throwaway pieces from the Cardinals lately that have succeeded. And it's a shame when that happens, but that's not Mo's fault. Now, maybe some of the other moves like trading away Rosarena, that can have some criticism, and that's fine.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because the Rosarena one, like, obviously when the Rays are willing to give up a top 100 prospect, like Matthew Liberatore, that means teams around the league valued Randy Rosarena. So like that one's one where you can give him more criticism, and like at the end of the day, it is their job to bet on the right talent. So like, it's a give and take, but like you said, like, people get mad about Zach Gallen, and it's like, if they had instead traded Alex Reyes and Carlos Martinez instead of Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen back then, everyone would have been like, what are they doing? So it's really interesting in retrospect, or like, again, the Lane Thomas truthers, where again, like, he was showing signs of potential, but if you were to compare all the Cardinals outfielders at the time, you're not going to value him over Tyler O'Neill, Harrison Bader, Dylan Carlson. Like, there just wasn't really a place for him. So and John Lester helped them make the playoffs. Like, your point about Johan Oviedo, like, Jose Quintana is a huge reason the Cardinals made the playoffs last year, and he gave them a chance. They should have won game 1 when he started. So like, it worked. So I think people give Mo a lot of crap for things that, if you look at, like, the Dodgers gave up Yordan Alvarez for a random reliever that didn't really do a lot of stuff for them. Like, every organization has these misses. But over time, it does add up. And when you're in a season like this, then everyone's going to notice these things as a lot more glaring holes. I don't really hear Dodgers fans talk about Yordan Alvarez very often, but when you're consistently winning, you don't really think about it.
Yeah. That's true. I just hate when I see these teams like, oh, what the Cardinals could have been. And it's like Garcia, Arozarena, Lane Thomas in the outfield. Like, oh, we could have had 3 All-Stars. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. But I'm like, you're also forgetting they brought in Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. Like, I would much rather have those two than Randy Arozarena and Adolis Garcia. But I mean, I'd love to have them all. Who won it?
Yeah, I still have no idea how Mozeliak walked into the room with Bridich and said, I'll give you this very uninteresting left-handed pitcher and a couple of prospects who probably won't make the majors for your, franchise player.
Yeah.
Unreal. And then demanded $50 million too.
I hope when he retires from baseball, he writes a book and talks about it, because I just don't know how the Rockies didn't call the Dodgers or call the Yankees, and they're like, hey, can you top this? And that they wouldn't have. So Nolan had to have wanted to play in St. Louis, because I just don't know how that deal gets done.
Absolutely. So moving forward a little bit into the realm of less possible, we brought up Goldonado, the nickname fans have affectionately given to our first and third duo. Do you think there's a chance either of them gets moved? I'm really hoping that the answer is a strong no, but...
Yeah, no, I don't see any scenario. Even if it made sense, I don't think they'd do it. Like, I don't think that's the organization they have. And with Mozeliak coming out so strongly saying that it's a no, I don't think they're going to turn around on that, barring like they lose every game between now and the deadline, and it looks like they legitimately have to blow the whole thing up. Sure, maybe it changes, or Nolan Arenado starts to view the Cardinals like the Rockies and starts to say, I want out. Like, those things could change things, but I would give it a less than 1% chance. Even that's pretty high in my opinion.
Yeah, I would certainly be shocked if either of those two things happened. But it's something that's been brought up a lot. I saw an article recently written by some Cubs outlet that talked about acquiring Goldschmidt, and I almost laughed out loud. I couldn't believe it.
I did laugh out loud. I was like, what are we doing?
You've seen that one?
Yeah. I'm like, what are we going to do? A Brewers one next week? Like,
it was like, oh, if the Cardinals and Cubs could work together, they could overcome the teams on the coast.
Oh, yeah. Because, I'm sure that's what they're looking to do right now. I also just think, like, realistically speaking, like, what kind of package are you going to get from Paul Goldschmidt that's going to make it worth giving him up? Like, again, unless you're looking to get into a 5-year rebuild, sure, like a top prospect, but I don't even know if a team gives up a top 20 prospect in baseball for him. Nolan Arenado too, like, he's been great, but he's got a really big contract. And obviously we saw what he went for when he went from the Rockies to the Cardinals. So maybe he's not as highly valued around the league as we think he should be. So I think people would be extremely underwhelmed. Like I think in the Mookie Betts trade, like they got basically Alex Verdugo back for him. Like most of these superstar trades don't really get the prospects back that you want. So I just think people would look back and be like, look at the random prospects that never even made the major leagues that they got back for Paul Goldschmidt. I'm like, that's why you don't trade a future Hall of Famer.
Yeah. I'm totally with you. I think these players don't grow on trees. When one of them stumbles into your organization because a GM, actually two GMs, made really stupid decisions, you don't just deal those guys for no reason. And I just don't think there's a way that the Cardinals actually contend for a World Series next year without both of those players anchoring their lineup in their infield.
Exactly.
I don't think it's possible.
Exactly. And I know like national, or like if you look at like MLB Network, it feels like does a segment on it every week about, well, if they blew up and traded Goldschmidt or Arenado, they'd have all this money to spend on pitching. And I'm like, first of all, they have money coming off the books already with Wainwright, DeYoung, Montgomery, Flaherty, Hicks, and they have publicly stated that they have more money to spend right now. So they have money to spend and be creative. And I think a really good comp is you look at the Texas Rangers, like the DeGrom deal, they're not going to go do that, but they went after Evaldi, they went after John Gray, they got Martin Perez, like they reshaped the rotation in about 18-month period, and look where it's got them. So you can turn, and they have two highly paid players, Corey Seager, Marcus Semien. So like there's ways to turn this roster around where you don't have to blow it up.
Absolutely. I'm really hoping the Cardinals do spend some money in the offseason on pitching. I think one of the players that's most interesting to me, and I haven't heard his name bantied around much because, he's hurt right now, is Frankie Montas for the Cardinals. I think he could be a great buy low candidate. I don't know how he signs a deal in excess of $10 million per year in terms of AAV, because he hasn't pitched at all this year. He was effective after being traded for last year, and people are going to be down on him because of the package the Yankees gave up to get him. And that was a pretty big package with Waldichuk. And so I think he could be a great buy low candidate for the Cardinals. I also want to ask, there's going to be a couple aces that come into play in the offseason. Nola and Urias are the two most interesting to me. Are there any names that I either included or didn't include that you think we could go after?
No, I think, again, kind of even like the deadline, it's going to depend on how things play out, how the markets play out. Like Nola's been up and down this year. So I'll be interested to see what his market even is this offseason. I still think he's going to get a mega deal, but is it out of the Cardinals price range, or does he like play his way into their price range? And are they comfortable going after him on a down year? I do think he feels like the most likely out of the big names that are available. I really do think there's a Marcus Stroman potential possibility. I think they kind of turned him off because of he had made some like little tweets and stuff about being interested in the Cardinals, and they never even pursued him. But I could see him, if extension doesn't work out, the Cubs being like, oh, I'll hop over sides. And so I think like a Stroman or Aaron Nola I don't think Urias happens. Like he just doesn't seem like a Cardinal, and the kind of deal he's going to get, like off the field stuff, and then the kind of deal he's going to get, I don't see it. And I do think it depends on what they do trade-wise too, because if they trade for some controllable arms, they can afford to go after a big name arm. But they also may decide to, like, let's trade for one of the Mariners guys. Let's get a Logan Gilbert, and then let's sign like 2 or 3 guys to those $12 to $17 million deals. And knowing one of them probably won't work out, but then you might strike gold with a Nathan Eovaldi type who you go into the season being like, oh, maybe he's an interesting 3 or 4 starter, and he overplays his contract. And so there's different ways they could play it. I think a lot of it will depend on what they do at this deadline and how the season finishes, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. The Cardinals will probably deal a lot in that middle tier pitching section, which is fine because there are lots of fines in there to be had.
Yeah.
I think one that sticks out to me is Sonny Gray recently.
Yes.
They're absolutely loving that acquisition. And that was a guy that I really liked when he was with Cincinnati. I thought he deserved way more attention there for how fantastic he was.
Yeah.
I think there'll be guys like that available for the Cardinals moving forward.
Yeah, and I do think like names will pop up in the trade market too, because they don't have to do free agency to do it. They can get creative and like, again, like I think this is unlikely, but if the Mets are going to trade at this deadline, Max Scherzer has another year of control. Like do they eat some of his contract and take back a Dylan Carlson and someone else? Like, because they want to go after Ohtani. So they're going to be clearing their books as much as possible. Like there will be things like that. This deadline, there'll be inevitably some name that pops up this offseason that none of us expected that would be available. So I think there'll be a lot of options, and the Cardinals can get creative with how they do it, especially if they do sell in some of their assets at this deadline, because they're just going to build their farm system up even more, where now you have a lot of pieces to go after starting pitchers if you want.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stuff about the Cardinals have to spend aggressively in free agency. It seems like some people believe that. I don't think that's true. We see the two teams that have spent most aggressively having awful seasons.
Yeah.
The Mets have to be, I mean, they're a much bigger disappointment than even the Cardinals right now. You look at the highest payroll in the league, they're out of it. There's probably no way they make the playoffs at this point. I think the Padres are falling into a similar boat. They're in fourth place in their division. I don't see them overcoming the Giants, Diamondbacks, and Dodgers. And the wild card doesn't look particularly inviting to them either, with some of these teams ahead of them. And it just looks like, maybe spending big in free agency isn't the way to move forward. A lot of these disappointing contracts between Correa, Turner, that whole shortstop crop, Bogarts too, has been really disappointing. And so I would love to see the Cardinals adopt one of those strategies that looks more like the Braves, where you develop your young talent, control it early on. That's something that the Cardinals tried with the young. It worked or didn't work, depending on how you want to look at it. But I think they could continue to do that, acquire talent through trades, which is what Atlanta has done in the past. So I'm really hoping to see the Cardinals adopt one of those strategies. Obviously, you need to spend a little bit to augment that.
Yeah.
But I don't think they have to spend aggressively.
Yeah, it's about how you spend your money. And because you look at the Tampa Bay Rays, they're never the biggest spenders, but they're always contending. So, but it helps when you can also spend more money. So I think that's something I really appreciated about Ken Rosenthal's piece that he wrote this week, is that he did kind of come out and was very critical that they don't spend money. But the point I think that was even stronger was when they spend money, they don't spend it well. So that's the problem you run into. If you're the Mets, you can give $40 million out, but if you give it out to Justin Verlander and he doesn't play for you, that's one thing. If you give that to Shohei Ohtani and he dominates the league, that's another thing. So I do think it's a both and. They need to increase their payroll. Being 16th in baseball doesn't make sense. You have the money to spend.
Absolutely.
But they need to start spending it better. And obviously if they do that, then we're not talking about them the way we are right now.
For sure. And I think to the people that really want the Cardinals to spend aggressively, you have to look at the recent payroll upgrades they've done. The guys they've brought in, very few of those free agent acquisitions have actually worked out.
Yeah.
The worst contract I can think of is probably the Leak deal, and the Cardinals miraculously got out from under that. Thank goodness, because that looked like a disaster in year one.
Yeah.
But Fowler didn't work out for the Cardinals. Leak didn't work out for the Cardinals. These big bullpen acquisitions that they made, everyone from Brett Cecil to Greg Holland to Luke Gregerson, none of these worked out. The Cardinals just haven't had success when they've delved into free agency. And so personally, I don't see a need for them to go, especially handing out a mega deal. Like, I was more than happy to see the Cardinals sit out from the Rodon market this offseason because he hasn't pitched yet. And I don't know if I'd want to see that for the Cardinals.
Yeah. And I also think too, it kind of goes back to how they where they're spending their money, because they're when you look at a Nathan Eovaldi contract, he got a 2-year deal. They're giving Mike Leake 5 years. They're giving Steven Matz 4 years. They're giving Dexter Fowler 5 years. They're going after these mid-tier free agents. They're giving them not quite top dollar, so they're trying to skim off a little bit, but they're still giving them long-term deals. I feel like they're playing in the worst market possible when you're paying guys that are probably past their prime, and all of them have ended up being past their prime. You're still paying them big money, and then you're giving them long-term deals where after 2 years you're already kind of we want out, but you're stuck. So I think there's an argument for spending higher, because I don't believe Trey Turner is going to be bad all the time. I don't believe that. I think when Rodon's back, he'll probably pitch well. Will he be injured a lot? Who knows? But so there is an argument to still spend that high, but you also can't do that when you keep giving out Steven Matz's contract, a Fowler contract, all these kind of contracts. They add up over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you make a great point. The Cardinals are definitely playing in the worst market. I can't think of a deal to a pitcher who's kind of a mid-rotation arm where you give them more than $10 million a year for a period of 4 to 6 years that's worked out. I mean, Matz comes to mind, but other guys, like, for example, Tyone, That deal is terrible. That looks awful for the Cubs right now. He's been almost unplayable, and he started 13 games for him already this season. So they're gonna probably deal with it for the next couple of years. I think you're absolutely right. That's the worst market to play in. And in terms of the position players we've acquired, hasn't looked great either. So yeah, I think if you're the Cardinals, you need to either spend like you mean it and go for that top talent, because you're right. Carlos Correa is going to be better. Trey Turner is going to be better. Those are good players. But there's no guarantee that a guy like Steven Matz is going to be better, especially with his age. I hate to see the Cardinals acquiring these guys into their 30s already.
Yeah, and it's just tough because it's like when you get a Steven Matz, what do you think is the best case scenario from him? It's a 3-starter. Well, you're paying that guy a lot of money. What's the worst case scenario? He's unplayable. Like even with Carlos Correa, Trey Turner, it's like you can feel them out there. You're frustrated. You're paying them as much as you are for what they're producing. And then to your point too, like if you're going after like some of the guys in free agency are looking for bounce back deals or looking to get a 1-year deal so that they can cash in again the next year on a Sonny Gray or a Nathan Eovaldi or Marcus Stroman, like those guys, then if it doesn't work out, you're not latched them for 5 years. So again, it's just how they spend their money, which is, I think they've started to learn their lesson. And then if they're patient here too, and they do a couple of these short-term patchwork deals, then you do start to have a Cooper Jerpy, a Tink Hence, a Gordon Graceffo. You've got arms coming. So I think they just got to figure out a way to make the rest of 2023 work if they want to contend, and then 2024 into 2025, they got to find a way to patch it together.
Yeah, you just mentioned some of the arms in the Cardinals minor league system. I think this is the deepest our lower levels have looked in a long time.
Yes.
It's very encouraging, some of the signs from down there. I think Cooper Jerpy was a home run for where they got him in the draft. They got him really late, and boy, he looks like he's going to be really good. Tink Hence, obviously, you can't say enough about how fantastic he's been in his brief career so far. And then even some of those other names, Pete Hansen, Michael McGreevy, Max Ratchik. I don't really know how to pronounce that. I might be wrong.
Yeah, you're good.
But those guys have been fantastic this year. And so I think the Cardinals minor league system looks like we're actually developing pitching again, which they took a hiatus there for a little bit, which was a shame because we really could use some homegrown pitching right now. Yeah. But that's really encouraging. It looks like you're not going to have to do as much in the future once these guys start to come along.
Yeah, which it was kind of a worry of mine going into, I'd say, midway last year, is that they seemed to be a little too top heavy organizationally wise, where they had Jordan Walker, Mason Wynn, Gordon Graceffo, and Tink Hence is lower in the levels, but then everyone else, it's like, okay, like once you get past their top 4 guys, it's a pretty weak system. But you look like Ivan Herrera is their 6th ranked prospect right now, and he's destroying AAA pitching right now as a catcher. Jonathan Mejia, I think he's going to be he has the potential to be really good. Like I don't think he's as exciting as Mason Wynn, but I think he potentially has he definitely has a higher ceiling as a hitter, which I think is really exciting. A Leonardo Bernal, Joshua Baez, like there's just a lot of names down here. And then they have a draft coming up in a few weeks where they can add to it. If they do sell at the deadline, they can add to it. So I do think that's a really exciting thing for Cardinal fans, because Randy Flores, ever since he's taken over, this system has just turned out players constantly.
Yeah, Flores is a wizard. He's probably one of the best in terms of finding position player talent. Yeah. And we've seen him turn his focus to pitching, and the early returns are great.
Yes.
That 2020 draft, you might see they acquired 6 players in the draft, I believe, 5 rounds plus the competitive balance round with Burleson. 4 of those guys turn into very, very strong prospects very fast. Bedell's healthy now and looks really good too. You might see 5 guys from that draft make the majors someday. Yeah. That's an incredible hit rate.
Exactly. Because I think people like, I wish I knew the draft off the top of my head, but I saw on Twitter the other day, the first 20 picks, I don't think any of them have had a significant major league career. I think it might have been like 2016 or something. And you just look and you're like, what are these names on here? So just even hitting in the first round is nearly impossible at times. But to have a draft class like the Cardinals had in 2020, like I think people like 10 years from now are going to be writing about that draft class as one of the best jobs someone's ever done. Now, it depends on how people turn out. If Mason Wynn can't hit the major league level, that story changes. But this right now looks like a very strong draft class. And then 2021 was followed up pretty well. 2022 looks pretty good so far. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Going all the way back to Gorman, the Cardinals have just hit in the first round consistently, and that's something you have to be able to do.
Yeah.
So I guess just a little bit more here. I would love to ask some of the more out there possibilities for this team moving forward.
Yeah.
We briefly mentioned Seattle. They've got some really interesting young pitching there between Kirby, Gilbert, and then I believe it's Bryce Miller is the guy.
Yeah, Bryce Miller.
Right? He looks like he could be really good. So do you see any way that Seattle could match up with St. Louis? Sort of a hitting for pitching type deal.
Oh, yes. So even before Morrissey had said that, someone on Twitter had asked me, what are some teams that you can look at for pitching? And I was looking at the Mariners and I was like, they're underperforming quite a bit. They have a ton of pitching. They need offense. It just seems like it makes sense. Then Morrissey comes out with that. I'm like, there is something there. And then you even look at their farm system too, like a Brian Wu, the third ranked prospect. Yep, it just came up. Emerson Hancock I think he's fallen off a little bit because of some injuries and stuff, but he's another exciting arm. They have a ton of arms. Now, here's what I think people don't want to hear. You're not going to just be able to give up Alec Burleson and Tommy Edman and get George Kirby. Like, correct. I think it's even Logan Gilbert, I think might cost you Nolan Gorman or Lars Nootbaar. Like, it's just, and I don't know what they're going to do about it. Like, at some point you have to make these uncomfortable decisions. I wouldn't, like, if I was ranking Nootbaar, Gorman, Brendan Donovan, and Edman, I think Nootbaar is my guy that I'm like, I don't want to give up because it just seems like when he's in the lineup, things go well. But like, you trade away Nolan Gorman, you might be trading away a future home run leader. Like, that's the risk you have to take when you don't have pitching if you want to go acquire young pitching. And George Kirby could blow out his elbow. Like, that's the risk you run. But the Mariners aren't looking like, if we're a Mariners podcast, none of them are like, man, I would love to give up George Kirby for Juan Yepes. Like, that's just not how deals work. And so I think that's something that fans are going to have to get kind of used to with this. But I do think I wouldn't say, like, if you ask me, will it happen? I'm not going to say yes, but I think it makes too much sense for them not to make a deal. They have a huge hole at second base. They could use another outfielder. The Mariners, obviously the Cardinals need pitching. I would love a George Kirby, Bryce Miller, Logan Gilbert. And even if they just like traded Brendan Donovan and got back a Wu or a Hancock and something like that, I think that's worth the risk. Yeah,
I'd love to see the Cardinals package together some of those pieces. Obviously, you want to hold on to Gorman if you can, but if he's what it takes to acquire pitching, you look at the team, the offense is good, has a lot of depth, the pitching doesn't. Deal from your place of wealth, even when it's uncomfortable. That's something Cardinals fans are really bad at. I see some of the trade proposals people put together, and it's like, why would they take this?
Exactly.
Jeff Bridich.
And it's funny because now people get mad at like other fan bases for wanting Jordan Walker for their like random scraps. I'm like, what have Cardinal fans done the last 5 years? Like, they're like, give us Garrett Cole for Paul DeJong and a pack of gum. Like, that doesn't work like that. I do think you make a good point though too. Like, giving up Gorman would be so hard, but when you have Brendan Donovan and Tommy Edman and Mason Wynn, that makes it a lot easier. Same with, even if it came to, I don't think they'd trade Lars Nootbaar, but even if it came to it, you still have Jordan Walker, Dylan Carlson, Tommy Edman. Like, they have the maneuverability of their pieces right now makes it easier, where if a team really wants Nolan Gorman and that's the guy they value, you can actually give him up for something significant because you have that depth built out. So that is the strength of the drafting philosophy of going after hitters last few years, is now you just have so many guys who can come up, you can afford to make that top end trade.
Absolutely. Would you consider Jordan Walker to be untouchable in all of these talks though? I think so.
There's no way. I just don't see it. I mean, Mosaic said it himself before, like, if Ohtani's available and he's willing to sign an extension, like, I think they give up Jordan Walker for Shohei Ohtani. Like, if Shane McClanahan or Ronald Acuna Jr. is available, sure, no one's untouchable. But like, in terms of what actually would happen, I just don't see a scenario where Jordan Walker's on the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that you see the Cardinals as organizationally so transparent about how much they believe in a prospect. Some of the stuff you hear about Jordan Walker, you just don't hear that about guys very often.
Nope.
It's stuff that I didn't hear about Reyes, who is an immensely talented player. And so it's very encouraging about Jordan Walker's future potential, obviously, but also the Cardinals just value him more highly than I've ever seen them value a player. Obviously, I wasn't, around for the early Albert Pujols days, but I personally think he's probably untouchable as well.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll get into the very last bit here. the Ohtani question, which is obligatory. I just don't see a way, especially with the Angels contending right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got anyone ever say yes to that question?
We've had people promise to like buy us things if it happens, you know. People have
Maybe
promised an Ohtani party.
Maybe I'll join the club. I think for like half a second during the WBC, I was like, the new Ohtani thing, that could be interesting. And I'm like, if there's ever a guy they'd be willing to spend big money on. But yeah, I don't see it. I don't think they're going to trade him at the deadline, first of all. And even if they did, like the package it would take to get him, I don't see it happening. And then like I think he's a Dodger. Like, I would be shocked if he's not a Dodger. And if he's not, like, you're like convincing me the Cardinals outbid the Mets and the Yankees and the Padres and the Giants, the Mariners. I just don't see it. I'd love it though. It'd be so cool to have Ohtani be a Cardinal.
Yeah, that's pretty much whenever Andrew brings it up, I say we're not going to outbid these teams. But I think if the Cardinals traded for Ohtani, I'd probably be upset because I don't want to pay for him twice. And that's the way I see trade working for him right now. If you trade for Ohtani, his fair value is your 4 best prospects.
Yep.
Like the Angels probably call and they say, give us Jordan Walker, give us Mason Wynn, give us Tink Hence, and give us a major league player like Dylan Carlson who contributes right now. We want all of those guys.
Yep.
And then, oh, by the way, if you're going to keep him for more than 60 games, which isn't a guarantee, you have to now pay him $600 million.
Yep. That's exactly right. Like, I just don't see why that would make sense for any team. I think a good comp for if somehow Ohtani got dealt at this deadline would be the Trey Turner, Max Scherzer trade, because they got a superstar position player and a superstar pitcher in the same trade. So it's like, okay, that's what you're doing when you trade away Ohtani. So I would say like they gave away Redbird, Urias, Josiah Gray, who are both top 50 prospects in all of baseball, and then 2 other prospects as well. I think you give up more than that because Ohtani has that name value and he's playing like an MVP again. So I just don't see how the Cardinals do that. But then, I mean, even look at this farm system. Like, I think Jordan Walker is the hype, but I think there are some times where I think like Mason Wynn, people might need to temper their expectations a little bit with him. I think he could be a really good shortstop, but like people thinking he's going to be Francisco Lindor when he comes up, and even like in his career, that's probably not happening. I think the only 2 guys in the system I think have true superstar potential was Jordan Walker and now Tink Hence. Cooper Jerpy, I think, could be a really, really good player. And I think Mason Wynn could be a really good player, but I don't see them being like transcendent stars. I think Tink Hence, if he can get those innings done, I think he's got the potential of being that kind of guy. So I think that's another thing when you look at prospects is we all want to believe all of their guys are going to be top guys, but that's just usually not how it works.
I agree with that. I think at the very low levels, the Cardinals have some guys you can dream on as well. I think Leonardo Bernal comes to mind. I'm really high on him. I think he could rise through lists and very quickly be regarded as one of the better catchers in all of minor league baseball. But you're right. Those are the 2 guys who right now actually have that potential and could be transcendent stars. So I'd be shocked if the Cardinals parted with either of them. The Mason Wynn chatter is nice. He's got some really fun tools. But there's every chance that he ends up more like a Manny Margot, who we say, wow, that guy's really toolsy. He could rack up a lot of WAR for you. But at the same time, no one was going to pretend like Manny Margot was a star, even when he was putting up 5 WAR seasons.
Totally.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a ton of fun to get to talk and then sort of, enjoy talking about prospects at the end with someone else who follows that closely. We hope to have you on again soon. And go Cards. Really excited about this stretch of games coming up.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandy. I really appreciate it. Love the work you guys do. Anytime, let me know. I'd love to pop on again. So
awesome. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too, Sandy.